Gentlemen, this is a moment in which the American public wants some very direct answers. And let me turn first to Mr. Becker. The Federal Reserve report found that SVB repeatedly breached its internal risk limits for interest rate exposure for years. SVB also had persistent shortfalls in its liquidity positions, following repeated poor performance on internally conducted stress tests. Mr. Becker, did you know about these breaches and shortfalls?
Senator, as far as the interest rate risk breaches, I don't recall. I do recall the liquidity breaches, and it really came from the feedback that we received from the regulators towards the end of 2021. And as previously stated, to my memory, the majority of those were resolved, and in fact, in February of 23, my recollection is the breaches were all remediated with the exception of one that we expected to remediate in the short term.
But you had no knowledge of interest rate exposures that were reported by the Federal Reserve?
So I know we received the MRA towards the end of 22. That's my recollection, and I remember our team was working on resolving that.
It's hard to conceive of a CEO of a bank not being attuned on almost minute-by-minute basis to interest rate exposures, since that's one of the essentials of banking. I'm not an expert, but I don't think I'd be contradicted. So you did not share with the board any knowledge of interest rate difficulties?
Senator, any regulatory finding was disclosed with our board of directors. So all that information would have been shared with them, and the specific committee that was involved in interest rate risk management, in the decisions around investments, would have been our finance committee.
And who chairs that finance committee? Who chaired it the last year?
The chair of the finance committee was Joel Friedman.
Joel Friedman. And, but you claim that you have no knowledge of these interest rate difficulties.
Senator, we treat all regulatory findings seriously. That was a matter requiring attention, which is at the lowest level of feedback that we would receive. And yes, we were in the middle of addressing it, but from our standpoint, it was, again, at the lowest level of feedback.
Now, I understand that you did not have a risk officer in place for the last year of the operations of the bank, that officer resigned early in the year, and there was no replacement. Is that accurate?
Senator, it was a mutual decision for the CRO to leave the organization in April, and we covered that in two ways. One is by putting together an office of the CRO, which had the leadership team of risk management reporting into me, as well as the chair of our risk committee. We kept our chief risk officer on board as a consultant in case questions came up to make sure we didn't have any gaps during that period of time. We hired our new chief risk officer in October of 22, and she started in December.
Was the focus of the disagreements the fact that the risk officer was warning you of the dangers that you were deliberately running, and as a result, you wanted that person to be removed from the bank, and that the consultant fee is a convenient way to pay someone to go away?
Senator, the feedback on making a change with the chief risk officer was actually from our regulators and from our board of directors. And so, no, from my perspective, that was not the reason behind it.
Well, it just seems that for a whole year almost preceding the collapse of the bank, you had an ad hoc risk organization when you were facing serious challenges, which have been identified here, in terms of your assets, in terms of your uninsured deposits, in terms of a host of things. And so it gives the impression that there was not a lot of sensitivity or interest in facing the problems that you faced. And consequently, the U.S. government had to bail out you and many of your shareholders, and that can't happen again. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Reid. Senator Hagerty of Tennessee.